Anyway, next presentation. Wayne's famous in the Coach Ed world for his acronyms, but I'm not that clever, so I couldn't think of a clever acronym with this one. I don't know. But in the end, all I've done here is wait until you got it, Jeannie. Now we can move on. In the end, as I shared at the beginning, and truly, firstly, all I did with this was take slides from our coaching manual at work and went them into PowerPoint and said change the slide formation so it didn't have all of our colors and logos on it and stuff. So I didn't make up anything new here. It's pretty much just the content that I've been teaching for years now. But as I said at the beginning, I just wanted to share how some of my thinking has evolved or changed in some of these areas. And so I'm going to give you a brief rundown because I know how quickly this 30 minutes goes when you go into some serious content. But a brief rundown. For me personally, hands up, the number one fundamental in all tennis is timing, technical fundamental anyways. If you can't have good timing, you can't be a good tennis player, it's bottom line. I found over the years that many coaches were really lacking the tools necessary to develop timing as a skill. In the end, the most common thing I'd always hear about timing is, hey, get it more in front of you, get it more in front of you, which is something, but it's hardly any type of a in-depth understanding of what timing is. And so for me, everything I did, anything I present to you was 80% or 90% Louis, and then I came around the edge and changed it how it was ever meant to be. But I want to give you just a quick understanding of the timing principle, just to make sure that I'm not taking anything for granted. Do you mind feeding me a few balls there? Okay. If you want to experience it for yourself, he's not going to feed you balls. But just for this first one, let me show you something. Stand up, if you want to. If you don't want to, don't worry. Okay? Give yourself enough space that you can put yourself in a position like you would if, I know this doesn't really exist all that much anymore, but maybe you serve and volley, you came to the net, and somebody hit a low return right into your feet. Okay, so just put yourself in the position to make a nice volley when you're on the service line and so, okay. Perfect. Now, hold that position. It's a physical workout. Will's here. Okay? Hold that position. Now what I'd ask you to do is take that exact same position, and the only plane you're allowed to change it on is the vertical one. Come up now and make a waist level volley. And hopefully, if you've done that really well, you're going to feel jammed now. What was a good contact point down low doesn't work at waist level. Okay? At waist level, it needs to be more to the side and more in front. And now take that impact point and take it up to shoulder level. And you'll feel jammed again. Because as the impact point height changes, the dimensions of it change. And so I tried to, it's not easy to do. But I tried to find some examples, and I just take YouTube videos and then click them on there so they're not super clear. But there's Federer, and hopefully you can see on a low ball, he's making contact very, very close to his front foot. And on a higher ball, he's making contact well out in front of him. Right? So just to broach the idea that in timing, it's not just out in front. There's different levels based on different parameters, so it's important that we understand what they are. The inside and the outside one, I didn't plan on hitting any balls here, but I don't know that this one's super clear. But the inside out, or the inside, maybe just pop in the back end corner there, if you don't mind. Won't test anybody, because I don't do that sort of thing anymore. But the direction of the ball is mostly determined by the racket angle at contact, and the racket angle at contact is influenced by impact point, wrist position, and body position. So what ends up happening is you see these coaches that, let's say I'm here and Derek's there and he's trying to pass me down the line and I want to angle the volley off, and so I go here and I go to angle the volley off and I don't angle it out very well, so the coach says, come on Larry, if you want to put that ball up the side of the court, get it more in front of you. So I get it more in front of me, and that influences my racket angle, and I angle the volley off and say, hey, job done. To angle the ball off the side of the court, you need to get more in front of you. But then he goes to pass me cross court, it comes to my backhand, and if I have him way out in front of me, the only way I can make that volley is with this ridiculous hyperextension of my wrist. Right? The more common way to make that volley is just to let the impact point come closer to you so it's easier to hit the inside of the ball. I know it's tough for you guys to see that from where you are, but I'm sure you can understand and feel that quickly, right? And so you just understand that it's not good enough to say, oh, volley more, impact more in front of you. It changes when the impact point is lower or higher. It changes when you want to hit the inside or the outside of the ball. Is that fair? This was all meant to be like this. old stuff that we all knew, but like I said, there's a lot of faces here I didn't recognize, so I thought I'd quickly clarify it. In the presentation after lunch, I'm going to talk a little bit about the feelings, and the block and the catch feeling are certain ones, but if that's new to you, then stay till after lunch and you'll get more detail of it. But the notion of it, and the cool thing about these little tricks or concepts, however you want to refer to them, that Louis developed over the years, is that they end up pulling so much together that you can do some really effective teaching really quickly. But a catch feeling is a feeling like drop shots and things like, you guys understand that concept, right? I don't think that's super foreign to anybody. And then the block feeling is more like taking the incoming ball speed and just blocking it back. We understand those notions. And so you can imagine if, I can't even tell who's on my video there anymore. Who was that? Whose eyes are good enough to tell? No?
The right side.
But I found a guy hitting around the service line. Doesn't matter where you're from, it could happen from any situation, okay? But what happens is that, let's say you want to have your player hit just, in this case, a volley. It's always easy to demonstrate in the volleys, but it happens in different situations. So I want to take the speed off the ball. So you say, well, have a bit of a catch feeling, absorb, whichever it is. And so I'm going here, and then at our club we call that volleying like Derek, but most places they call it hands of stone, right? And so then eventually you work towards, I thought the feed would be way harder that time. So nice.
Smart kids.
And so it's because he won the coaches tournament, so he can take any smack, it doesn't matter. But anyways, you can see that with that catch feeling, I brought the impact point closer to me. Now that could come across as some little trick, but there's so much to it, right? Understand, if you put your arm all the way in front of you, do that if you can do it without hitting the person in front of you. Okay, so you want to have an impact point way up in front of you, so you stretch out in front of you, and then lay your hand back at a 90-degree angle. Okay? Unless you're like hyper flexible, you just found that the forearm muscles really tightened up and engaged, right? Okay? So how can you have a catch feeling when your muscles are so tense? Okay? So you ask somebody to have an impact point in front of them when they volley, but more feel, nearly impossible. Make sense? Okay. Conversely, when I do that catch feeling, take a look, sorry, I'll go like this, take a look at my wrist position. Okay. To do that, sorry, I hate missing that one. Okay. When I do that, I now have such a passive sort of a wrist position to do this, it naturally takes the speed off. Well, what's a block feeling trying to do? Keep the speed on the ball. Okay. And if you want to be, can I have a ball, Derek? If you want to be super sciencey about it, when the ball hits a firm object, it bounces back at about 60% of the speed, not full speed, but we usually talk about it like keeping the speed of the ball. But if you try to keep the speed of the ball and the impact point is too much beside you, that the physiology, the technique from that is so weak that you're naturally absorbing speed. Okay, so then when I want to block, when he hits the ball harder, feel free now, and I want to block, and it's actually 60%, it's not 100%, but I want to block, then I need to be far enough in front of me that I can create that technique required to keep the speed. Does that make sense? Okay, so that was not really meant to be part of the presentation, but I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page, okay? Is that in my mind, just sharing an idea with you, sharing my feelings, nothing, I don't think that's been written anywhere as like the thing, so this is not biblical, it's just like Larry's idea after doing this for 29 years or whatever it's been. Timing's the number one fundamental. Bottom line is most people aren't equipped with enough tools to develop timing sophisticatedly. Is that a word even? I don't know, I just used it. Okay? So there's this whole framework of tools that you guys can use. That's the important part for that. Okay? Now, from there, as I said, that today was going to be about evolving sort of, just sharing the way that my thinking has been evolving. This is a slide that's in my presentation when it's just talking about the body and racket. Well, it's in this presentation, but like I said, it's just from the coach's manual. And all I try to do is I share just some images. In the old days when I gave the coach 3, and I updated this a couple of years ago, but I always used Agassi, Federer, and Gonzalez. So anybody who's old enough to remember those 3 could remember like just how they were like the perfect, like compact, average, and big type of swings, and so I'd always use them, but I found some pretty good examples still. And I don't know how you look at technique, everybody could be a little bit different, but if I just go piece by piece and we'll talk about like wrist position, hand position, elbow position, that kind of thing. So you can see here, that Federer has kind of a palm out wrist position, right? Okay. His hand position is just shoulder height or slightly below, and his elbows just below that again. I consider that pretty neutral. Okay. And then you can see somebody else who, in this case, it's Djokovic or Murray? Can't tell there. Elbows a little higher, hands a little higher, wrist positions a little further out. So that's a bigger swing, right? And we know that from amplitude being a influencing factor for generating speed, all that kind of stuff. Then potentially that size of swing gives him more potential for racket speed than Federer. Now it's only potential because there's other factors, but there's potential. Bottom line is you can see that's team, isn't it? You can see all of these different racket positions, all these different preparations, and I'd be surprised. Like, there was a kid that I was coaching, he just left for university this past year, but his name was Eric, and Eric won U16 provincials a couple years ago. He was like that kind of level player, decent provincial level player, but never did much nationally. And one day his forehand evolved into this. It wasn't on purpose, but he got to the point that he was preparing like this on his forehand, and I was like, oh my gosh, we need to change that, because he couldn't time a ball to save his life. It was just too much motion going on pre-contact, and it was totally screwing with his timing. So it's like, we need to change that, simplify this swing. Now it works for team, and I used to say with Gonzalez was crazy, if you can remember, elbow up, hand up, racket up, okay, everything was like this. But there's other factors. I could say Gonzalez played on the clay, and he played from further back. Agassi was like this because he played from closer in and preferred the hard courts. And there's it's a multi-factor thing, let's be clear. Right? But at some point, and that's where my thinking is going, there's some there's some purely vision piece to this, right? And I remember the first time that I ever saw Oded speak was at the Tennis Canada conference. I can't even remember how many years ago that would have been. But you're sharing the idea between the eye dominance, and you see that there's eye dominance theory and there's different stuff like that, but I still have never seen enough on actually developing the vision of the players, which to me is so key to all of this, because no matter what when we watch the pros and go like, look at how funky their swings can be, our kids can't do that. Why not? Right? And the answer sometimes is, well, we play indoors on fast courts, it's Canada, it's tougher. But what I really started thinking is, I wonder, when we start making, and these are the same players, but just in a return to serve situation, so even the players with bigger, bottom line is no matter what your swing is, when timing is challenged, your swing gets smaller, right? But I have this memory. It was funny when I was putting this together, I have this memory of just the court over there, or whatever, I don't know how you number the courts here, 1, I guess it would be, okay? On court number 1, I'd come here for a TDC visit back when I was doing that type of work, and Tracy Bennett was working with this girl named Alexis Procopia. And at the time, Alexis's timing was all over the place. And so I really challenged Tracy, and I remember Wayne was there, and I was like, we gotta clean up her timing. Like, it's just, she can't time a ball with any level of difficulty. And then the next time we came, Tracy had said to me, Larry, we're working on her trying to drive a ball down the line when she can step into a backhand and really accelerate. And just from here, I'll just make it up, and I don't have a 200 ball, I'm not very good anyway, so these demos always take some level of just visualization on your part. But she was going here, and she's going, she had this real pushy backhand down the line. It's like, well, how can she drive a ball when she's starting her racket right here? She needs to start her racket right there, or the timing's no good. And so it's like if the bottom line is, what I'm trying to express to you is that if the only solution for improving timing is to shorten your swing, then at some point we've got really limited players. And we say, like, if that kid can't take a bigger swing than that and still time the ball, she's never going to be a tennis player. That's what it comes down to. And so it started with this thinking of mine. It's like, I want to make sure that we're not always dealing with changing, and sorry, this is my most Wayne-y type of slide, with lots of words and lines and stuff like that, okay? But it started with, instead of always changing the technique, if you weren't allowed to change the technique, what would you do? And a couple things occurred to me. When I was living in Ireland, because this stuff was always in my mind, timing was always front and center to me. And I remember there was one of the top coaches, probably, I don't know if you guys, all of you are too young, except for, I don't want to call you that, those of you out that aren't too young. But maybe some of you in the room are lucky enough that you ever got to meet Ivo Van Aken. Ivo van Aken was kind of the pioneer of the Belgian tennis system that, Kleisters and Hennen and all them came through. And I remember having a chance to chat with Ivo once because he was doing some consulting in Ireland when I was there. And my exact question to him was this: okay? If you have a kid whose timing isn't good enough, do you think that you should shorten their swing or just force them to keep doing it? And because he has a different methodology and thinks differently, his answer wasn't, didn't get me to exactly where I wanted to go, but just to share you where the thinking was. And so I went out, and it's so fun to have an argument. Do you know Colin O'Brien? Okay, so Colin O'Brien was this kid who was in my academy, and he was a nice tennis player. He won junior nationals a bunch of times. He played at William and Mary and played a bit of Davis Cup and that kind of stuff. He's a decent player, right? And so Colin, I remember saying to the kids at one point, okay, we're going to do return of first serves, but the rule is you still have to take a full swing. And Colin hyperextended his wrist and was out for like 3 weeks. I was like, okay, so we can't do that anymore. But that's the notion I was playing with, is like, is it always shorten your swing? Because we know that limits other things, right? As a matter of fact, some of you might have heard this, and now I recognize that I'm rambling. But some of you might have heard this. There's a Spanish story. This is folklore. I wasn't there. I don't know it to be true, but it sounds good to me. Was that the Spanish nationals used to be during the second week of Wimbledon, and they put it during the second week of Wimbledon because none of the Spanish players would ever be in the second week of a grass court tournament, so why not run their tournament then? And then at some point Nadal wins Wimbledon, and somebody asked the Spanish coach, how is that possible? He said, we knew it would happen. We knew it would happen, which is great to have that level of belief in the first place. But the next question was why? And the why question was the important one. They said, because we teach our kids to swing big. And it's way easier to develop the skills to swing big and then shorten them when the game gets faster than to develop the technique to swing small and then make it bigger when you need to generate more speed. And so I'm like, oh, there's some logic there. And I was worried that I've been screwing that up too much, that I've been really getting kids to swing too small too soon, or too much. And so then the thinking all had to come back to this, and it does come back, as much as a really fun acronym for those of you that could pull it together. It did come back to an old acronym that Wayne would always use in his pantheon of acronyms, which was FAR. And FAR, so I'm going to use you again, Derek.
Yep.
Okay. But FAR stood for Focus of Attention Range. Okay? And it occurs to me, and so I hope you can track this slide, because I didn't build this just for this presentation. I was just taking some stuff here, okay? But there's two words that we talk about in sort of the ability to use your eyes to identify what's coming on: perception and anticipation. Okay? In the way that I deliver this material, and it doesn't matter, it's terminology, so I'm not saying this is the only way, but however you use the words, I think it's truth when it comes to content, okay, is that they're divided by the impact point. And so once somebody's made contact with the ball, now you're perceiving, you're trying to read what's going on with the ball, okay? Before your opponent's made contact, you're anticipating. Make sense? Okay. And when can that anticipation start is the big question. Okay. There's two parts to that question, okay? One of them is from the player's perspective. When can it start? I would suggest to you that the anticipation can start the second you decide which shot you're gonna hit. As soon as I've chosen that I'm gonna play this attacking ball inside out over there, I can start gathering some, okay, yeah, I did it, I executed it well, looks like it's working. So before they've ever hit anything, they're starting to gather information required to help them understand earlier what's coming back next. And by doing that and cutting down that thought processing time, they should still be able to manage a bigger swing because they're not so rushed and have to shorten it. Does that make sense? That's kind of just where my thinking has gone to, is like, are we making sure that we're working inside of this perception anticipation piece enough? And again, I'm not asking anybody to raise your hands, but I challenge you to just think in your own coaching how much time you spend on perception and anticipation. Okay, because in my experience, very few people do. All the power to you if you are, but very few people do. Okay? And I wanted to share, this will be the last little one for us there together, but I want to share this summer, I took on a little 9-year-old girl at our club. We just had a kind of summer, I started to work with this little 9-year-old girl because she was really cool and super focused, and I thought I'd like to help this girl out a bit. And so, but she was starting, I shouldn't say she's starting, but she's not super good by any stretch. So just come up there, we're gonna play mini tennis, okay? Sorry, let me take the basket. We have to change jobs. You're gonna be Anya, I'm gonna be Larry, because I'm better at that. I'm gonna come there, sorry there. Oh, it's easy for you to walk over the net. Okay. So Anya and I have been doing some work to develop some kind of basic motor patterns with her swing and all that kind of stuff. Pop back to the baseline. We're using green balls, but whatever. And she had 2 yellow strips. If you could just break the court into 3 equal sections, so 9 feet, 9 feet, 9 feet. So after she developed, we just did some little tossing and some hand feeds and some basket feeds and some really closed down rallying stuff. And she was starting to get some basic feeling to her rally technique. We said, okay, now we need to add movement. Okay. So we started, is that 5 minutes ready? Is that what that buzzer was? Okay, I got it. And so then we start to add some movement. And so I say like, okay, Anya, when I feed over there, you gotta get out there, be balanced, have your proper technique. And there's different stages to this. You gotta hold your balance until it bounces and recover, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Bottom line is, once you finish that process, the next thing I start to do to her is I say like, okay, Anya, you know that the ball's not always gonna go to your forehand or your backhand. It's not like that. You can't say to your opponent, so now I can hit it anywhere I want. Okay, so now that's the last stage of this particular drill. And as I'm doing that, this is what I do in the first time I do it to her. Ready? I go like this. And I didn't teach Anya, I didn't introduce any, I didn't have any PowerPoint, nothing. And do you think that she went over there and hit her forehand? The answer is yes. I made it so ridiculously obvious. And then I was like, but Anya, they don't always come to your forehand. Right? And I did that. And so, what am I doing at that point? We understand that I don't know what the word is, the opposite, the reflection of anticipation is disguise, right? And when somebody has to, at a very high level, when players have all this skill, they can really disguise their shots. But at a really poor level, people don't have the technical skill to disguise their shots, right? So I say, let's just introduce some anticipation by just really technically giving it away, right? Remember what I said about the volley? There's 3 things that influence the racket angle: wrist position, impact point, and body position. So I just made all of them point this way, and then all of them point that way. Right? And so she started. I didn't even ask her to, but she started to see where I was going to hit. And then we progressed. And so then I started to go like this. And I'd keep my body position exactly the same, and I'd go like this. And you can see what I'm doing. Now I'm making it so my body position's the same, and I'm only changing my impact point. As she started to click, I never once, like Wayne said about decoding, I never once talked to her about anticipation. I just started to bring her attention onto me because there was clues that I was giving that would allow her to see the ball earlier, with the overall principle being, I believe if they can see the ball earlier, they're gonna be able to swing bigger and maintain good timing. Make sense? So, I think this is the last one. If you don't teach perception and anticipation, then at least don't ruin it. Okay? Because I would suggest to you that perception and anticipation are fairly natural skills. Right? Now, people get better at them, and they can be trained at them. For sure they can. I've seen it. Okay? But at some point, they're fairly natural until they become trained out of them. And how do you train somebody out of perception and anticipation? Stop getting them to pay attention to anything that's not internal. And we call that, inside of our methodology, closed skill training, right? And so, if you guys aren't familiar with that, again, the open skill process is perception, decision, execution, feedback. That's what makes us not figure skating, right? Because you've got to read the incoming ball, decide what to do with it. Well, if all of your training takes the perception and decision out of it, and you spend all your time hand feeding balls and asking them to finish with their back heel in the air, if that's what you do, then how can they ever develop any type of perception and ultimately decision making, because you've never made that part of the training. So then you develop all of these technical skills, completely take the vision piece away from this, and then watch your players and go like, I don't understand, like, you know, I had this kid who played a tournament last week and he didn't even recognize in the 3rd set that the opponent was left-handed. Like, yeah, well, did you ever ask them to look at the opponent? Is there any part of your training that would lead them to think that something down there was useful for them? Or are they just thinking, elbow, come on, elbow, right? Oh, I missed that one, pinky. Okay? So that's it. I just really think upon, you know, reflection on this, that I need to, and so I thought I'd share that with you guys, make sure that in my goal to improve timing, I'm not always doing it just by a technical shortening swing, and I'm doing it more by understanding an open skill process and really developing perception and anticipation in the players. That's it.